Welcome back, everybody, for part two on business leadership for CFOs. Let's jump back in. What if the CEO, they're concerned that the CFO is underperforming, right? Like, what would help you assess whether, you've over promoted what should be a controller or whether you need coaching? Like, how would you assess?
So, can I flip the question upside down? Because I think it's a great question. What I want to do is flip it and say, for the CFOs who are actually listening today, what are the specific things that you can do to prep yourself for that new higher role? Because the CEO is going to look at you and say, "Gee, are you ready for that higher role?" Right? So what can you do? What's in your and it's not hard. It's just that you've got to say, okay, I'm going to do it. Here's some ideas. I think one of the things I would start doing is I would start focusing externally now. Um, are you strengthening your industry network? Are you putting you in a position of being, say, the leader of a not-for-profit? And the reason why I say this is because when you're the CEO, you will not have the time to do that. But perhaps if you're able to do some volunteer leadership of a not-for-profit, whether it's chair of the board or whether it's some other role, they'll give you the idea of flexing those kind of muscles and taking a look at the issues from that particular perspective. What can you do right now to do more capital markets and fundraising than you do right now? Like what specifically is the CEO doing in that area that perhaps you could stand in and perhaps take leadership on? Can you do more PR or more spokesperson role? Okay, this is, there's some things that are highly critical where the CEO must do it, or there's others that you might be able to do it. Can you step in, for example, and or get some more upskilling? There's some very, very, very heavy upskilling you can do. The Harvard Advanced Management Program, the Ivy Executive Program, multi-months away from your job. Not everyone can afford to do that kind of thing, but that might be something that you can do externally. Coaching is something that's a lot more practical in the sense that it doesn't take you away from a lot of time. The second sort of category is really to build internal capabilities. So, for example, what can you do to upskill your ability to be an effective presenter, an effective public speaker? What are you doing to um, build your bench underneath you? The whole succession planning, making yourself not necessary in your particular role, so that you've got a couple of people underneath you that might be somebody who could replace you, because that'll help as well. And by the way, that'll free up some of your time to do some of this other prep work. Is there any way that you could ask for or take wider responsibilities within the organization itself? Sometimes asking the CEO if you can take responsibility for something that they maybe are getting bored with or would like to sort of pass off to you. Maybe it's to take some operational responsibilities, maybe of with respect to a business line, or maybe operations or HR technology or whatever it happens to be where you can be more involved. Maybe it's a question of saying, okay, what can I do to build stronger board, one-to-one board relationships? As a CFO, you're already presenting the board. You're probably already having a number of conversations, but what does it take to build even stronger conversations? Um, I think I think that if you're able to do some of these things, you can start to, you know, build the experience base, the demonstrated experience base that makes it easier for a CEO to say, well, this person is actually somebody who I'd be supportive. And it's also because the board who's going to choose who's the CEO, or to say, yes, we've seen this person already doing the job or part of the job, and therefore we think he's capable of it.
You mentioned training, all these fancy courses, coaching. All the research shows that for the C-suite, as we said, it's a lonely job up there, and you can't just be, in your echo chamber. The performance is always optimized when there are external supports like coaching. So I want to talk about if the CFO is responsible for the budgets and they're setting budgets for highfalutin coaches in training, do they have to sort of manage that conflict of perceived conflict of interest there? Or a similar question might be, when you work with a client and it's paid on company dollar, is the dynamic different than if it's they pay for it themselves? Maybe it's better outcomes for them one way or the other.
So this is an interesting question. I remember when I was a senior VP of an American public company, and the person who signed my expense reports was my boss, the CEO. And it was a very interesting thing. He said to me, Randall, I'm the only person in this entire company that signs his own expense reports. And I know that most organizations will actually have the CFO sign the CEO's expense reports, but in this one, that wasn't the case. So it was a very interesting thing, and I subsequently had this conversation. It was basically, listen, if I sign for too much, the board's going to be on my case, and this is not something I want the board to be on my case. At the CFO level, the question of saying, okay, how do you get to the next level, and how do you sort of tune yourself up for it, is very much a conversation that you have with your boss, the CEO. And the issue is not a conflict of interest. The issue is, where does the CEO see the need for your professional development, right? And what is the budget that's attached to that? So the CEO is probably already spending a chunk of money on executive retreats. Rania, you and I have led a whole bunch of them, and they've been fantastic in terms of upskilling, not just achieving like a strategic plan or whatever the other kinds of things, but there is training that takes place there. So they're already spending money on that. They may also spend some money to send the CFO to various conferences and membership organizations where there's some point professional development on, say, technical topics or something else. And we also know that it's part of it's a reasonable thing at the executive level that they get a coach to make sure that they're truly performing at the highest level possible. And it's not a question of conflict of interest at all. It's really a question of saying, okay, this is one of the most expensive people that we have in our organization. We want to make sure that we're getting every single thing out of them. And if a coach can help make that happen, okay, most CEOs are interested in understanding how and why. And it's really up to the CFO to make the case saying, something. By the way, coaching is not that expensive. Okay. But it's up to the CFO to say to the CEO, this is what I hope coaching will accomplish for me, and this is why. I'll also say we've been in the situation where a client will say, I know for me to get the next level, I should get coaching, but I don't want the company to pay for it. I'm just going to write a check myself. And the reason why is because that way I know the coach is 100%, 100%, 100% just working for me. And everything that happens there is just between the two of us, right? And so we've had that kind of situation as well. By the way, if the company pays, it's still just between the coach and the client. It doesn't go anywhere else, right? But still, there's no conflict of interest here, so long as the coach is able to make the case as to why and what the outcomes are.
Okay, Ruth. In the tech sector, rapid scaling often involves taking on significant debt, which can lead to boom bust layoff cycles, especially in the transition between low and high interest rate environments. How can CFOs play a role in breaking or mitigating these cycles? I'm not a CFO, but often work closely with them, and this is a really tough challenge we face.
Well, I guess part of the question is taking on significant debt. The question is, what's the capital? What's the capital stack? What's the structure that's being put in place, right? And if you're not able to get equity or convertible debt or some of these other ones, and you have to rely just on debt, clearly there's a problem. I think one of the things that the CFO can do is uh, they can manage the cash and the treasury function and the capital requirements. I don't want to say function, if you will, a little bit more proactively than perhaps anyone else in the organization. So, for example, if there's X number of months runway, and in 6 months, you got to go and get some more money. Obviously, the question of when do you want to tighten the screws is going to be a lot. Well, the earlier the better, right? However, if it chokes off growth, that's a problem too. So the question of when do you go to the markets looking for new money? What's the structure of that money? Is it possible, for example, with some of the debt to get that converted into equity, maybe by attaching a warrant or changing, being a little bit more creative with respect to what you offer? Once you're a public company, it changes once again. But certainly with private companies scaling, the question of capital structure and the kind of planning that you can do and what the market will bear is the number one thing. I think that there's a boom bust layoff cycle. There's no kind of sensitivity analysis with respect to the debt. If it's all variable debt, if it's all floating paper, I mean, that's a very expensive paper. Okay, and that's a huge amount of risk. I should say that if Ruth, you, or if there's anyone else who's interested, one of our white papers speaks specifically to the question of of, of how do you address the issue of cash flow management, particularly when there might be a recession and everything. And we're happy to send that to you or to anyone else. Just let us know one way or the other. And that's a much deeper exploration on this much particular way. Oh, actually, let me just mention one other thing. Um, I think, Ruth, you said that you're not the CFO, but you work in this kind of environment. Um, I think that what the CFO says with respect to what's happening is exceptionally important. Because if the CFO sort of gets on the horn with everybody and sends an email to everybody, we are 1 month away from closing up shop, and we'll probably be doing layoffs. You'll have the best people leaving immediately, and you'll be left with the ones who, frankly, are of lower value, right? On the other hand, if you say that all is rosy, this also is not exactly helpful because when all of a sudden the Grim Reaper comes, everyone's going to be very surprised. And how come we didn't hear about it earlier? We could have done something. We're part of the team, et cetera, et cetera. And the whole question when you whether it's a capital crunch or a debt rate crunch, um, what the CFO says and how they do it. And the CFO is a critical part of the communications loop. And in a certain sense, in the same way that everyone hangs on what the CEO says, when it comes to when times are tight, everyone also hangs on whatever the CFO says, every last word. So interesting. And thank you for the question, Ruth.
Yes, great question. Ruth here wrote here. Of course, that makes sense. Thank you. And yes, we will send you the white paper. And anyone else here wants it, happy to share it as well. Okay, to everyone on the call, I'm going to ask Randall a question, and we're all going to see if Randall's eyes light up.
Shoot.
Randall, you have always been a leader and pioneer in marketing, and you often see the opportunities, intersectionality of all aspects of business and brand and everybody's roles as it relates to marketing. What is the intersection that you see between marketing and the CFO? Like, should there be collaboration there?
Listen, I said it earlier. Money is the oxygen of business, and marketing is obviously what generates cash beyond financing, right? Here's the interesting thing that I think um, um, here's the interesting thing that many CFOs understand, and some of them actually don't, and it's an interesting bridge. If you're going to do a budgeting exercise and you're going to say, well, this is the percentage of costs on G&A, general and administration, overhead, et cetera, and this is the percentage that we're going to spend on this, and this is a percentage on this, and this is a percentage on that. And gee, we'll have more, by the way, and this is a percentage on marketing, and this is the percentage on sales and everything. If we're going to spend, if sales go up, that means we have more money to spend on marketing, right? Which kind of makes sense because there's more cash. Therefore, more cash can be sent into this particular line item marketing, right? But what happens when everything's cyclical to a certain extent? Sales are down. Well, if sales are down, we have less money, which means, thank you, marketing. Some CFOs will say, time to tighten the belt here. we have less to spend on marketing, you can spend less on marketing, which I think is very counterintuitive because when sales are down a little bit, that's when you've got to lean into marketing to increase sales, right? And very often there's a little bit of a dispute with respect to how much is available for marketing and sales-oriented activities. And I think the CFO is right to say we have less money, therefore you can spend less money. And the CMO, the Chief Marketing Officer, is right by saying the only way we're going to increase sales is if we spend more money on marketing. And these are very different perspectives. And I think the best ones will say that and say, okay, now let's just roll up our sleeves and figure out what's actually really happening. Because very often the concept of product market fit, the idea of you spend so much money on marketing and then because there's such fit, you'll get a greater return than the investment that you're making. Okay, but what happens if the marketplace changes? Sometimes marketers can become lazy and they don't realize that product market fit isn't exactly a good fit anymore. And therefore, the marketing investment they're making, that's why sales have gone down because the fit has changed, the market's changed, the environment's changed, the customers changed, right? New competitors are in the market and things have got to be changed. Just putting more money, digging faster will not get you out of the hole. And investing more won't either. So the CFO by saying, "Hey, listen, you got less money." Sometimes that gets the CMO thinking, maybe I got to look at all these other factors. And then once those other factors are addressed or turned around or pivoted or whatever it happens to be, then it becomes a lot easier for the CMO to go to the CFO and say, we've made these changes. We do now actually need more money to make this happen. Here's the data that supports it. In which case the CFO has got to say, okay, we're gonna move some of these budget numbers around and we're gonna find money because that makes sense. I've got a case for it now. Right. And this is great collaboration where it makes an awful lot of sense. Right. The best CFOs are ones that are also CTOs, CIOs, CMOs, chief people officers, chief operate, like everything because they've got their fingers in all this. The worst ones are when they think they know it all and because they've got the fingers in it. It's the collaboration that makes an executive team actually work really well. Right. And yes, I know an awful lot about marketing, but thankfully, I think I know some about the pressures of the CFO and certainly the CEO having been in that role too. So it's an interesting question. So
Randall, I appreciate your thoughts and your answer, but when I came up with this question, what I specifically had in mind was when we see like trends in like marketing of what companies are featuring, whether it's that SEG, the governance, equity, society stuff,
ESG.
whether ESG, whether we see, look how fun a team we are, look how social we are, look at the events we put on, or look, or we have the cutesy behind the scenes stuff in the office showing the human side of the high-powered team. These are all different trends we see, but where I see a gap and is we don't see social media posts where it says we have 98% employee retention. That's great for the I think it looks great, where we invest X number $100,000 in employee training and we work with clients who do these things, who have these numbers, and it's something to be very proud of. So maybe I'm just seeing it from my own lens of business growth and employee engagement, but like how many pictures of what a cool party we hosted can I see when I want to know like are you responsible and professional and treating your employees well? That's what's important.
I couldn't agree more, and thank you for bringing that up. But it also and it also sort of tweaks something else. For a public company or a very, very large private company, okay, they do say posts about a lot of those things because they've got the infrastructure to do that kind of communication. And they do talk about insurance companies, for example, they're rated in terms of their solvency and their ability to, do their, you know, make their numbers, etc., and be safe, if you will, in insurance companies, and they've got the right ratios, and so they do that. Except for it's just not really exciting, right? Public companies, thank you very much. They have to file, and they send press releases out. Sometimes this is not like a social media, Facebook kind of kind of thing. Or on LinkedIn, we see it a little bit more for sure, right? But for the CFO whose core responsibility is the fiscal management and planning for the organization and making sure that the rest of the management team can also manage based on trusted numbers and everything. This is something that is very core. All those other things, many CFOs will say, well, this is kind of that's that person's job or this person's job, and that's this person's job. And so the question of okay, where does the CFO and why doesn't or why shouldn't the CFO also take a strong amount of interest in it? I say the best ones do. And I also say those who are interested in moving into a CEO role, perhaps doing more of that is the kind of thing that will actually be helpful in proving to others around you, the board, maybe the existing CEO, that you're actually a viable candidate for that role.
With the time we have left, Randall, I want to talk to you about this signal to noise ratio. What advice would you have for CFOs in terms of like understanding that signal to noise ratio and knowing what's important and staying focused?
Yeah, okay. So I think it goes to the basics. You got to be able to do your job, right? But your job has probably changed quite a bit since over the last number of years that you've held it. So what are you doing to make sure that you're on top of all the latest and greatest, not just the technical, IFRS, fill in the blank, et cetera, but also with respect to your roles as a leader, as a model, excuse me, as somebody who might actually be a successor for the most senior role. And by the way, if not that, certainly for other roles in other organizations or so I think that make sure that you're taking care of the knitting, right? And then say, what do I need to grow? And then frankly make a plan to get there. This is not rocket science. If, for example, you're not great with respect to people, get some coaching. If, for example, you're not great at oh, I don't know, speaking, okay, get some help there. If, for example, you want to work on changing the culture of your organization, gee, that's something that you work on too. Gee, if it's a question of developing more external network and everything, add that onto your list, right? Have a conversation, build the relationships at the board. All those kinds of things are not beyond most competent CFO's role and capability, right? So that would be my number one responsibility. Here's another one. When was the last time an executive retreat or leadership retreat was organized? Right? Well, could it be that you should organize it? Right? And gee, you can help set the agenda, right? And take off something from the CEO. Same thing with respect to all hands meetings, right? Town halls. Would the CEO be open to you being the primary person who actually speaks and answers the questions, etc.? These are all possibilities. You may be surprised that some CEOs don't enjoy doing that kind of thing. And when that's the case, putting up your hand and saying, hey, here's something we might be able to do. I'm happy to run point on it or be the primary speaker or whatever it happens to be, right? But to step up so that people can see you doing your job. I'm looking at the time, Rania. I've got a couple points that I really want to
Absolutely,
make
Randall. The
before we
floor,
go.
please send us off with your final thoughts.
So one of the questions I've certainly been asked is, yes, how do you get the experiences you needed to be successful? Okay, but once I'm in that role, gee, it's impending. What are some of the things that I can do that can sort of help me be more successful coming into the role? Because if you know that, if you're able to set yourself up for success, and if you're able to think about it beforehand, you might, frankly, might make the difference between a successful launch, if you will, as your CEO. And also, frankly, if you're coming into any role, I think these are great pieces of advice. So I think one of the things that's really important, and one of the things that certainly was an eye opener for me the first time I was a CEO, was that nobody told me anything. When I wasn't the CEO, people would talk all the time. I don't want to say we gossip, but we talked, right? What's going on with this? What do you think about that, etc. When you're a CEO, people sometimes assume that you know everything and that everything that's coming out of your mouth is always perfect, which by the way, it certainly is not, right? Which is why you've got to be so careful saying things in that role. But making sure that you're almost you know what's happening. And what I call this is building redundant intelligent pathways. Okay, redundant intelligence pathways. So for example, how do you find out what's happening beyond just what your direct reports, the other C-suite people are actually saying? Yeah, of course, you can have staff one-on-ones and you'll have the various meetings where you talk about the issues and whatever the goals are and everything like that. Um, but how about one-on-ones with the front line? You know, what if the idea of skip manager meetings where the direct reports of your direct reports will meet with you on a particular schedule? Skip manager meetings are very common in many organizations, right? But it should also be at your level. How about hands-on monthly meeting. How about the idea of using what I call early morning assistance, which, by the way, is one of the ways I actually started my career. Um, I was brought on as the early morning assistant to the vice chair of KPMG. And I showed up at his desk at 5:36 and we talked for around 2 or 3 hours, typically on strategy and business leadership topics. And at 9 o'clock, I did my job and he did his, and 9 p.m., that was the end of the day. Well, forget about the long days. Let's focus on the early morning. That was a 6-month assignment. That's where I learned to be a senior executive, right? But what happened after that? Short version is I got placed somewhere in the organization. Well, guess what? He'd been doing this for years, and he had this network of former early morning assistants who consistently fed him intelligence, and he was able to ask questions about what's going on in different parts of the business. And this is a multi-billion-dollar organization. It was a brilliant idea, but the question is, how do you start? And this is a longer-term activity. Start building your set of intelligence assets, if you will. Another thing is the question of building a coaching culture rather than building a directive one. So if you're doing that, you start to also get information that starts to come up. Um, it's very easy to have an authoritative directive culture. Do this, and everyone does it, right? It's a lot harder to do one where you get people to think and take responsibility, and you're there to support them and everything. But if you're able to do this now as a CFO, okay, when you're a CEO, it becomes an awful lot easier because at least your area has kind of got that culture, and it will seep into other areas. It's a lot easier as a CEO to have that kind of culture as opposed to one that's just purely directive. Um, Building a culture of innovation. I think that's also really important because that way it's not relying just on you as the leader. And, how do you build that coaching culture or a culture of innovation? Part of it is alignment with the performance appraisal system. Rania, you had said something earlier about what's the connection between HR and the finance, the CFO function, right? And that's the kind of conversation in place. Executive alignment and modeling. Whether this is specifically retreats or how you act as the CFO, investments in upskilling to move people up. Okay, either in particular courses or I actually have retreats or in coaching and everything. Town halls, management retreats, like all these kinds of things are what build that culture and also showcase you as a leader who can move into that role and also give you the ability to learn, if you will, how to use these management levers, these leadership levers for once you actually get there.
Any other thoughts, Randall?
Just, I think this is the greatest opportunity, when somebody's thinking, gee, how do I move to that next level of my career as a CFO? I think it's just a very exciting time. I spent 9 years at KPMG, and there's an awful lot that's possible once you sort of start asking yourself.
Well said. I want to thank everyone who joined us here today. I want to thank Randall for all these insights. Thank you so much for the time. And if anything we talked about resonates with you, you're welcome to meet with Randall, meet with me. I can share the link in the chat, book a call with us. Hopefully we'll see you at more of these monthly sessions. Happy to put you on the email list for those. You can email us at info@randallcraig.com and look forward to seeing you again and be in touch on LinkedIn.